Hey, Media Machine listeners. This episode was recorded before I officially joined the pod, but I wanted to step in and introduce it because it couldn't be more timely. Johanna sits down with Karina Martinez, co-founder and CEO of Drafted, for a conversation that lives right at the intersection of culture, sports, and media power. They talk about the Super Bowl, Bad Bunny, Karol G, and why Latina fandom isn't a side audience. It's one of the most influential forces shaping the market today. Karina breaks down what brands still get wrong, why translation isn't strategy, and how culture-first media doesn't just reflect growth, it drives it. So if you've been watching the pop culture shift in real time and wonder why it feels like everything is moving at once, this episode gives you the language and the framework to understand what's actually happening. So trust me, you'll want to hear this one. Take it away, Johanna.
Karina Martinez is the co-founder and CEO of Drafted, the first social-first media company at the intersection of sports, Latina culture, and technology. In just 2 years, Drafted has grown into a community of more than 100,000 fans, organically reaching 3 to 5 million people each month across platforms and collaborating with global brands like Verizon, Dove, and Degree. Born in Asunción, Paraguay, and raised by Cuban immigrants in Southern California, Karina has built a career turning culture into commerce. Before launching Drafted, she founded the Havana House, a creative communications agency dedicated to reshaping media narratives through culture-forward storytelling. Today, she's leading a movement that's making representation measurable, using data, fandom, and storytelling to build a new kind of media ecosystem where culture drives both connection and growth. Wow, Karina, handful, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Media Machine.
Thank you. It sounds a lot cooler when you put it that way and not like the 10 grueling years it took to get here.
You come from a very really fun background. I wanted to start with a little bit of, some origins. Tell us about you and what put you on this path.
Start from my childhood. As you read, I am adopted and born in Asunción, Paraguay. When I was about 8 months old, I came to the United States, and my parents, who adopted me, who are my parents, are immigrants from Cuba. And then I have a younger sister who is also adopted from Russia. So we are a very fun, international, hybrid of 4 humans who built a family together, and it was and is just like such a lovely experience. This melting pot of cultures. We grew up very traditionally Cuban American.
I love that. Tell us what you do today.
So I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Drafted, which is a sports culture media company that has the mission to change the commercial messaging that exists for Latinas in sports. And what that means for us is, when you think about sports, you always think about athletic performance and athletic excellence. But the reality is, especially when we look at Latin and Latina culture, sports is inherently part of our identity. Most people in the United States are from Mexico or Latin America, and therefore soccer or football is a key part of that. My family's Cuban, and baseball is very popular in the Caribbean, and boxing. And so there's such a direct correlation with how Latin culture and identity go hand in hand. And it felt as if that was missing for Latinas. And the reason why we were really and are really adamant about Latinas and not, Latinos and Latinas or the collective is because we know really 2 things, which is one, the woman in the household typically is the financial decision maker and or the family manager, or both most of the time. And if sports and sports culture really wants to continue to see opportunities, this is the demographic in the United States that can really propel them. And we have been historically both undervalued as a consumer and also under-celebrated. And when you bring those 2 things together, that's how we as a business can really drive, hopefully, some really positive change.
And why now? Why did you guys feel that you needed to do that now? Especially Latinas in sports.
Yeah.
It's a pretty specific focus.
Yeah, it is. I think the nice PR answer would be that all of the trends are there. But I wouldn't say that we necessarily 2.5 years ago when we were ideating this, we were like looking at the market and trying to find the opportunity. It really was just myself and my co-founder Jennifer, who is also an avid athlete, a mom of two young girls who play sports. It was really just building what we needed. And I think in looking and reflecting over our own stories and doing hundreds of one-on-one interviews with women like ourselves or who have similar lived experiences, we started to build something that felt inherently necessary based on our own lived experiences. As we started to do that, I think what we were really lucky and timely is that everything is really pointing to this being the future of sports and sports culture and media. I always say that we accidentally or intentionally, depending on how you look at it, we sit at this really amazing intersection of where three trends are going, which is first and foremost, media and media consumption. I am such a big believer in new media and the power of social because it democratizes the way that we consume and learn about stories. I used to have a PR agency, and the traditional way in which our brands and our clients would get acknowledgement in media was, you would have, you'd have the brand, then you'd have a publicist or a PR team. They would package it nicely, and then they would have relationships with other media folks in hopes that person would like the product, like the story, and therefore want to write about it through their point of view, not even through the point of view of us, and then disseminate the information. And therefore, that's how people learned about new stories. And now with social, with podcasts, like we are all storytellers, which allows so many new voices to be heard and so many new perspectives. And it's now having young girls and folks who are consuming stories realize how powerful their voice is because they're now seeing people like themselves either tell the stories or stories be told about them. So we are a new media company and everything that we do is social. So I think that's a really powerful trend. We have the growth of women's sports, which every day continues to be a more valuable asset. And we have two amazing leagues here in the United States, the NWSL, the WNBA, and so many emerging leagues. We have a volleyball league and a softball league and now a baseball women's team. And then like the stars really aligned when we're now seeing this really powerful shift in popular culture where Latinos and Latin culture is popular culture. We have Bad Bunny halftime Super Bowl show. Karol G is headlining Victoria's Secret. That's insane. Like that was never a place where our culture was celebrated or acknowledged. And I think we have the privilege of seeing something and experiencing something and putting it into a business that matters to the community, but have all of these external factors that are continuing to propel the mission that we know is really important.
Yeah. I was reading a little bit about your past and how you started your career. And you mentioned that when you started, you were doing PR and your boss at the time said, this is probably not the right path for you. You should probably do something else. And you were such a young person. You're like, you know what? I'm just going to go do it my way because obviously these people don't understand me. But I want to read my note here.
Yeah.
As I was reading that in Business Insider. So in that essay, you wrote that about struggling to reconcile all parts of your identity. I was curious to know if there was a time when you realized that you no longer had to shrink yourself, that you could lead fully as who you are. And then, so please walk yourself back to that moment. What gave you that courage? And then look at you now.
Yeah. For better or for worse, I am who I am now. There's a couple pieces to this, and like I'm trying to remember that journey because it's a lifelong journey. I think belonging is a lifelong journey. But I always think about this the same way that you would train for a marathon, right? Like you're not going to wake up one day and go from never running to signing up for a marathon the next day and feeling good about it or even something that's achievable. And I think sometimes people think about how to find that confidence like overnight that way. And it happens really subtly. And I think it happens almost in the same way that you build that muscle, right? So I think for me, it was like in my early 20s, I found myself a business owner accidentally and having to navigate what that meant. And I knew that from my past experiences of being employed elsewhere, that I was always a better me and a better leader and a better creative person when I felt comfortable in my own skin. And so little by little, I think I just started to make very gradual changes, and they continued to be rewarding to me. And it was maybe as simple as going to a conference and not wearing heels and then wearing, sneakers or something a little bit more me, and then feeling like, okay, I feel a lot better here. And then you start to just like gradually, little by little. And I think there was never really like, here's the moment that I'm making that decision. It was the culmination of 100 little moments of courage that got me here. And I think what is really important is that it's never about hiding yourself or minimizing yourself, but I think it's about learning how to use the parts of you that are valuable in this moment. I always really want to celebrate people who have a lot of nuances, because that means that you see the world in so many different ways that people who have less nuances do, and you can bring new light to things.
I love that. So find yourself and embrace yourself.
Yeah, truly. Yeah.
I want to talk about Drafted. So you and your business partner built Drafted as a social first media brand.
Correct.
What are you guys doing differently to traditional media companies, and why are you guys finding success?
I think there's a few things that make us a little bit different. I think obviously we are speaking very directly through a very different point of view to a different audience, right? I think historically, when people think about Latinas or even women, they think we're going to speak to them through hyper feminine subjects. Motherhood, family, beauty, makeup, fashion, like those are all things that are usually tied to the female consumer. And we said, okay, great. Like, yes, all of those elements are important to women and are part of our identity. But there's such a different way to celebrate that isn't just about making women feel as if that's the only thing they care about. And so when we look at sports, we look at sports culture. So it is fashion, it is beauty, it is traditions, but it's through sports. And I think that is what makes us unique in how we approach things, is that it's not just about celebrating what you would think traditional female fan experiences, which is like you go on a website and you buy your team's jersey and it's a V-neck instead of a crew neck, and it has bedazzled and it says San Diego Padres. That's what people have said, and the industry has said about female fans, and they only care when the shirt is pink and it's pink night, and then that's when they come, and everything else are just accessories. And instead we centered them, and we understand that there are levels of this cultural fandom, and there are the women that like the bedazzled and the pink, but there are also women that love the game and buy jerseys and style them and turn them into really creative skirts. And then there's people that love a certain sport because they're Colombian and they don't speak the language anymore, but they have a cultural tie because maybe they watch the game with their grandparents, and maybe they don't speak Spanish, or maybe they're not fluent in Spanish, but that's how they connect to their culture. So everything is really rooted in culture, and the reason that we can do that is because myself, Jennifer, and our team has those lived experiences that they can infuse. And so everything that we do is about celebrating that rather than trying to diminish our lived experiences, and instead use that to connect to that consumer. And then, yeah, everything lives on social first because that's where things are happening, especially in that like 18 to 35-year-old consumer. Like they're learning about a subject, and then maybe they're going on New York Times to read more about it, or maybe not. And that's where it all starts and lives. And so it's really just about meeting this consumer where we already know she is.
As I think about what you're saying, is you guys are a culture first company,
Right.
where you don't think that maybe the traditional media companies are driving with culture.
Traditional media companies are not thinking about the layers of culture for this younger demographic. I think we can use other media companies, even Univision and Telemundo, and they've done amazing things for the community and for uplifting the Latino voices, but even them are not speaking to that younger consumer because they're speaking in language and not necessarily in culture. And I think that's the core difference. When we look at the future of this country, 1 in every 4 Gen Alpha will have some sort of Latino identity, and that doesn't necessarily mean in language. That means in culture. And so everything that we do is centering that cultural experience and we just infuse a little bit of sports in there too.
I love it. And you guys are not just focused on like the World Cup that's coming. You're looking at Paris Olympics and just all sports and all Latinas in sports, right?
Yeah, it's all culture. We're sport agnostic, but we're culture first. So what that could look like is a number of different things, right? So when we look at the World Cup, let's say, obviously this is the men's World Cup, so we know no female or Latinas are going to be playing. But the angle that we take is what is the unique Latina fandom experience that is different than even the Latino male or the white woman or the European woman? What is that lived experience that she has? Like how much, how are we talking about what places are safe for her to go to? How do we build community? Where she should be shopping? What's the outfit of the day that she's gonna wear? What is the makeup routine that she has for superstitions before a game? Is she gonna light a candle? Is she gonna host her friends? All of these different things, and that's how we look at it, And then you take that and you replicate it. I think we can do that with American football, we do that with basketball, but then, when we look at women's sports, then we go a little bit deeper towards the athlete story, and that can be what is it like to be a Latina collegiate athlete when maybe only 3% of all of collegiate athletes are Latina? And what has that journey been like that maybe is different than your team members, especially if your parents are immigrants? Like they might not be helping you fill out FAFSA, they might not be helping you understand and figure out how to recruit. So again, it's all about bringing in what we know to be true about sports, but adding that cultural nuance and celebrating that and opening up people's eyes to what it's really like to be at the intersection of sports and culture for us.
We had an executive from Duolingo on the podcast, and she was talking to us about how they killed Duo, the main character. And it was really an exciting case study. Do you have a case study of a post or a campaign that you guys did? What were the results? What came up? What did you guys learn about your drafted community?
Earlier this year, we worked with Dove. And Dove, for those who don't know, like they spent a lot of their business mission really talking about body confidence and body positivity and really through the lens of women. And so historically, they've spent a lot of money in sports and really driving this message. And they had this Super Bowl campaign that was going to run, during the Super Bowl. And then you were going to have this like hero moment around body positivity and how that impacts how often young girls drop out of sports. And when we heard about that, we were so excited. And they came to us and said, okay, historically, we've usually just taken the English language asset and we'll translate it. And that will be the way that we communicate to our Latino or Hispanic audience this message. But we think there might be something a little bit different that we can do here. Like, how do you see this? And so what we did is through our own data and our own audience and our own insights is we said, let's take this one step further and let's talk about the cultural impact of young girls and how that's different than maybe an American girl or a girl who is not Latina. And what we found out is that these really endearing nicknames that our family says with so much love, like gordita, flaquita, chonchita, however, we have all had them. They can actually sometimes be really harmful to a young girl's confidence and the way that she sees her body. And therefore, whether it's conscious or not, that may be the way that she walks through the world because that's how her family calls her. If everyone calls her gordita, how does she feel about herself? And therefore, if she feels that, is she going to feel like sports is a place, or is she going to give up because now that she has that title? And so we wanted to rewrite the narrative a little bit. So we went and we found 3 young girls ages 9 through 16 with real stories whose parents called them Chonchita, and they got to tell their story of how they take that nickname and they redefine it for themselves and feel empowered. And then we turned that into assets, and it was called Yo Soy.
So to translate that is, I'm chonchita, like I'm a fatty, but I'm
chubby or
powerful.
I'm thick, chubby, fatty, thick, but I'm powerful. Or I'm skinny or I'm frail looking, but I'm quick and I'm agile. And so that asset,
And this was done in Spanish?
this was in Spanish.
Oh,
And
wow.
that asset outperformed, I think, all of them. because it was real. We can all relate to it, right? Most of us have been called a nickname. If not, we have a family member that we call a nickname. And
Yeah.
they still do into their 30s and 40s and 50s. And they're like, no longer chubby, but that's your Uncle Gordo. That is a perfect example of how we use the entire drafted ecosystem to work with a brand and bring in a unique cultural take that you're really not going to get anywhere else, that we're able to extract because we have that relationship with our audience.
And you guys are putting together reports that are really helpful. So you guys did your Latina fandom report
Yeah.
that helped quantify culture for the first time, right? What insights from that research most surprised you guys?
That was such a fun and interesting project. As we were building the very beginning, early stages of our company, people would ask us like, okay, so yes, you have this intuition to build this company. Are you for sure? Like, do Latinas really care about sports? And that was always the question. And we inherently knew that was true, right? I don't know how many people I need to bring in here to tell you. And we were like, okay, fine. Let's go quantify this for people who, for whatever reason, cannot wrap their heads around. And so many really interesting data points came up. But I think the one that always resonates the most with people is when we talk about Latinas being passionate or Latino sports fans being passionate, but we don't think about how passion translates into commerce. For every one jersey a white female fan owns, a Latina owns 7 or more. And so
I have 5 in my closet.
exactly. And I think that
It's different teams and different,
exactly. Exactly.
and they're all soccer.
Exactly. That's exactly the point, right? So it's again, there's so many really great data points in there to explore, but I think that is the one that quantifies the value of this consumer the most because it says, okay, they're passionate, but passion means that they're spending more. And here's how much more they're spending that jerseys are not cheap. Even a replica jersey, you get even like at a J.C. Penney is still $50 to $75. That means that this consumer is spending 5 to 6, depending on what type of jersey, $700 to the $100 if a white female fan is. So why are you not putting your attention to this consumer that 7x multiplies in the same for the same effort? A lot of what that report was to do was exactly to quantify how passion translates into commerce and more importantly, or just importantly, influence. 80% of Latinas have purchased a sports product or merchandise on behalf of someone else. And that could be tickets or a jersey or like a memorabilia bug, anything like that. I think it's like over 40% of Latinas have influenced somebody to follow someone else on social media. So it's like all about really quantifying what we, again, already know inherently to be true, where it became therefore undeniable. That is really like the power of our company. And what we love to do is we really believe that 2 things can make a difference. It's having a media company that can shape culture, but then having data in order to provide the tools for others to know how to also shape culture with us.
So you've worked with brands like Verizon, Dove, Degree, you mentioned them. What have you learned about authentic partnership and what that really looks like? First of all, what is authentic partnership? And how do you make culture a growth strategy?
It's really exciting when you have a partner that just understands and is excited about doing things a little bit differently. I think those partners that you just named are folks that are willing to try things and be creative. Even in the case of Dove, you saw a great return, and that's the value that you get when you think a little bit different and you trust the folks that you bring in. What continues to be true is that the folks and the brands that we have worked with usually have somebody who's in leadership that has a lived experience that understands. That is something that we all, as a community, need to continue to advocate, is that there needs to be voices in the rooms that can raise their hands for all types of communities. Because if the people who make decisions only have narrow lived experience, then you're only going to get narrow-minded products and services and messaging because they can only think within the realm of their own lived experience. That's always such a wonderful partnership is when people in those rooms just understand. And I remember in particularly like the woman that we work with at Dove, her name is Sophia. She was a basketball player and she loved the idea when we brought it to her because she was like, no, this is what I was called as a kid. Like, this is, you're so right. And I think that's what authentic partnership is when you have somebody or you have a team that not only understands but is trusting enough to know you as the expert. I think that's sometimes the other part of it that can be a little bit difficult is when a brand knows that they need something or sees the dollars behind something, but then wants to continue to keep certain elements as part of their legacy. And that's just not how we can make change. We have to challenge new things and be willing to take a little bit of a risk in the sense to trust the people who know a different lived experience and can bring that value.
So going back to when you started, when that boss of yours said to you, this might not be the right path for you, the career path, you might want to look at something else. And today, look at where you are, and you've gained the trust of these brands. And now people are inviting you guys and opening up rooms and chairs and tables for you guys to come in and tell them and guide them and consult them. At what point did what you guys started building as a brand became a movement? Like,
first of all, I think my old boss was right because I am a risk taker and I like to challenge things. And I don't think most corporate settings are hard to navigate when you are such a risk taker. It's a blessing in disguise because he was right. I'm grateful that he made me challenge myself and say, okay, belong in other rooms. As much as this is hard to say, is that when you're challenging the status quo, you need numbers. We've always said we have to be so loud that they can't ignore us. The only way we can do that is by rallying as many people to be as loud and as rowdy and excited about us and about this as we can. That's how we've been able to build who we are because when you have maybe, whatever, a couple hundred people are like, oh, it's a niche. But now when you're saying that we have 100 and growing thousand followers, we reach 3 to 5 million people every month, all organically, like those are numbers that pique interest. It's millions of people every month saying this matters to me. I think the movement was always part of the business mission. When we first started, I used to always tell Jen, because I'm a big soccer fan, it was like, when the US women's national team won the World Cup and they were advocating for equal pay, the way that they were able to get it done was not because they were angry and they made a bunch of points. It's because they got so many people to be angry with them doing parades and they were going on CNN and they were posting about it. Like they got so many people behind this that the change had to be made. And I think that's how I see our business is we have to get so many people to speak on behalf of us and on behalf of themselves and to where you can't ignore it. And I think we're starting to scratch the surface a little bit of that.
was there a moment that you guys realized, okay, this thing that we did is what generated that big movement? Or I want to get a little practical for anybody listening. Like, what was the thing that you guys did? Was it getting Melissa on? Melissa as an advisor? She's a very well-known soccer athlete.
Amazing. And now has become an amazing friend.
Tell her I said hello. I love her. Colombian sister.
First kind of awakening was when we had just launched a couple years ago and we were like, let's throw a launch party. And I think at that point had, I don't know, maybe 1,000 Instagram followers. And we're like, let's just throw a launch party and let's see what happens. Let's just bring some of these people together. It might be nice to meet these people. And so we rented out 2 tables and bought 2 pitchers of beers in hopes that maybe, I don't know, 15 people would come and we would make it look bigger. And we had to shut down RSVPs because there was over 100 in less than an hour. And I'm like, we got 2 tables. They're going to kick us out.
We're going to have to spend more money.
And, and this is we're talking about a social media presence that had people all over the country. And so it wasn't even we built a company for LA and it's oh, that makes sense. There's 100 people from LA that want to come to our launch, celebration. Jen was always laughing. She's like, these are not our friends. We don't even know these people. We had never met anybody. Maybe 2 of my friends came. It was 100+ people, 90 of which I'd never met or seen or knew existed before that day. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting because, I think the most valuable thing a person has is time. And if they're willing to drive to across, county lines, which LA is very hard to do, and spend 2 hours as a stranger, this is interesting. So I think that was marker one. I think then a couple other markers were just the volume and the continuous volume of messages that we get from people. I think we probably get, I don't know, a handful every single day. And it's a hybrid of I just found this is so cool. I live in Oklahoma. I don't really know any Latinas, but now I see so many in my feed and this is so nice. To tias being like, hey, here's a photo of my young niece who's 11 and she plays rugby. Like, you guys should feature her. And we're like, great. And so I think there was so much validation from the consumer and the person and that community member that I think after a while it became undeniable that this was something that was very and is very needed in market. When you think about a movement, like it's about when folks who you don't know understand and want to ride alongside you because they feel seen and validated, maybe even for the first time. And I think we have hundreds of thousands of women who feel that way about our company.
That's amazing. So we have CMOs, we have media executives, we have creators listening to this podcast. Let's assume a lot of them are not Latinos and maybe don't even care about the Latina demographic. Why should they? Or the Latino space?
I go back to the three things, right? I think I'll take the emotion out of it because it's not even about what I want, it's what's the truth. And I think at this point, there are too many external signals coming from so many unrelated sources that what's not justify, but that reflect this new truth, which is that Latino or Latin or culture is now popular culture. I think like I just read about this earlier, whereas like before it used to be like Latin culture influences or helps shape. And now we're seeing really like actually Latin culture is really the nucleus of culture for like in the United States. I said at the beginning, Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl. We're talking about the biggest platform in the country, arguably maybe even the world, seeing how the NFL is distributing, and across the world. And it's going to be a Spanish, not just a Latino, not Gloria Stefan, who historically has sang in English and Spanish. So it's the English
J-Lo and Shakira.
J-Lo, Shakira, exactly. Where Bad Bunny, we're like, there's no English. I'm Cuban, I barely sometimes understand him. Like there is so much unapologetic culture, and he's headlining the biggest game in the country, arguably the world that year. I know you talked about it with Karol G. And those are like, and I think people think, oh, these are celebrity moments, but yes, but those are how culture trickles down. This is how it starts with media and what in entertainment, and then that continues to trickle down from there. But if you want to get more macro or, more micro, think about even like the World Cup coming to the United States. Who's that core fan? It's going to be the Latino. You think about the Gen Zers had this whole trend called like boots only summer, and it was like wearing soccer cleats around and jerseys around. And who's starting that? Brown and black girls. They're starting the internet trends that permeate into fashion. And you're seeing Adidas sponsor the New York Fashion Week with Willy Chavarri, like who's a strong Mexican Chicano. I think like at this point, the signals are there. And if that isn't enough, the numbers, I said it earlier, 1 in every 4 Gen Alpha is going to identify as Latino. And there are 60 million Latinos as of today, and will probably continue to grow upwards of 100 million in the next 20 to 30 years.
I want to shift a little bit into leadership because you are a young team leading a young business into stardom. Your culture is all about don't shrink yourself to fit in and come as you are type of mindset. Tell me more about that. What does that mean to you guys? What does the day-to-day look like for you guys?
A little bit of chaos. I think what's really unique about being Latino is that there is not one unique Latino lived experience. I think there's so many layers to it. Again, adopted child of Cuban immigrants is very different than you and your Colombian roots, and from the foods that you eat to the words that you say to the music to, Jennifer, who is, third generation Mexican American who lives in Dallas, Texas. And I think we recognize that. And we also recognize that our lived experiences can also be blind spots, because I don't know what it's like to be, an Afro-Latino raised in the Bronx. And that is a very important point of view. And so when we hire, especially on the team that creates content and is really external facing, we really think about, as much as we can, all of the different unique lived experiences that our audience is and has experienced. And we need to make sure that we have people who understand that, so that they can infuse that and bring their, that part of who they are and who they represent and who they understand that I don't, into it. What I don't want, and I think often happens, and we try to be very cognizant, is that people think Latino and they think only Mexican, or they think the Sofia Vergara's of the world, right? Like this polished, more, light skin toned woman who's very hyper feminine. We want to make sure that we are trying to be as much as we can for everybody. I think when we think about building our culture, we ask people to challenge us. What I want is for someone to go on our feed or go on our page, and within the first 10 to 12 boxes they see on Instagram, they see something of themselves. I don't want them to go spend 2.5 minutes for them to find an Indigenous Latina, or for them to find LGBTQ or an Afro Latina, or a non-English speaking or Spanish only speaking. So I think all that to say is, like, type of business that we're building, it's imperative that we find and build a culture of collaboration, of learning, and where these people who are on our team are vocal and feel heard, because our job is to really be like that beacon for the community. And, we're not perfect. We're not going to get every single thing, but we're going to try our damnedest. And the only way that we know how is by bringing people who can challenge us and make sure that we are upholding to those standards.
I think I read somewhere that you guys are building a membership platform, right? And
Yeah.
it's a platform for mentorship, jobs, and scholarships, right? Tell me more about that.
There's a couple of things that we're ideating around, and it's an evolution around the business and business model. I think, where we are right now is, like, we operate very much as I think the most replicable model is like an influencer, right? We have these followers, and then brands pay us, and then we create content or original IP and experiences in partnership with them. That was really strategic from a business perspective, because it allowed us to start making revenue and start to, build relationships with big brands. But I think, where we are as a business now is we have, this 100,000 and growing community that we are not serving directly other than through content. That is part of what is next for us, is how do we serve them directly that isn't just aspirational content or even, an experience here and there. But there are so many resources that this community needs, and that we're still frankly learning. We have athletes, young athletes, who are trying to figure out if and when and how they're going to play college sports. Then we have a little bit older athlete who is, been an athlete her whole life and now has no idea how she's going to find internships and get a job, because playing professionally is not, in her life roadmap. We have moms who maybe didn't play sports as kids because it wasn't available to them, but want to make sure their young daughters play sports. And then we have fans who just love the game, but, like, maybe don't feel safe going to a bar because, like, it's not a place where female fandom is celebrated. And so we have all of these different consumer segments that we're frankly still learning from, and trying to figure out how one place and one centralized place can serve, and how we can be really like this distribution of resources that we have every day. And that was a long-winded answer to say that, like, yes, it's something we're working on. It's something that, I think we're still navigating, because we want to make sure that we really understand what this consumer needs.
We can talk about that too, because my husband and I are building a platform. We're trying to eradicate hunger. We're trying to build the intelligence layer of food security. So we've definitely entered that space. So we'd love to
I would love to.
exchange some ideas there.
Definitely.
Women's sports obviously has experienced a surge in visibility and investment, right? And you guys seem to be Right there, right smack in the middle. What role do you see Drafted and Latinas playing in this movement, both culturally and commercially?
I think women's sports, and they're doing a really good job. And I think where they're doing things right is they're looking at the fans that maybe men's sports have historically ignored. And I think that's where the Latina consumer can really play into this, is maybe she doesn't feel like the NFL or going to her local NFL team is a place that she feels connected to or valued. And so some of these emerging women's leagues are saying, we value you here. You're seeing that also as, what they do with like the LGBTQ community. And they're using their platforms to really create this community of fans that maybe have been less seen as less valuable to other leagues. And so I think that's a really exciting place for women's sports from a business perspective. But I think from a fandom, the culture of it is, I think like what's so amazing is that there's just so much opportunity, particularly when it comes to soccer and I think flag football. I'm really excited about.
Why are you excited about flag football?
Flag football really has the opportunity to be this next sport that is led by Latinas. And flag football is a lot like soccer. You don't need a lot of tools in order to play, right? You can play at a park, you can play with your friends, and so it allows more access to things. You have Diana Flores, who is the brand ambassador for the NFL for flag football, also Under Armour athlete, all about flag football, and it's now going to be an Olympic sport. From a playing perspective, I think Latinas have an opportunity to really take a couple of these sports and really make them the sport like that's ours. That's the part I'm really excited about. When you've historically undervalued somebody for so long and they start to see that you care and that they are valued, the sky's the limit from there.
Sports has historically been a unifier. So, how do you see its role evolving during these interesting times?
I don't think I see it evolving. I think I see it as a steadfast exactly for that. I think that's one of the only things that gives people a sense of community. I think that sports is and always has been a place where people come together and they feel belonging. I think sports has to be this steadfast thing that we use as an outlier, as a place to feel community. I think sports is such a fun thing because it's the only thing that has such a deep emotional connection that I use identifying language. You don't say, I'm a Yankee fan. You don't say, the Yankees lost. You say, we lost, or my team lost, or we won. And I think that's the essence that I think it needs to keep whenever things become really trying and become really fragmented, is that it needs to keep that essence of this communal.
I love that. So at the Media Machine, we explore the intersection of process, profits, people, and planet. The four pillars that I believe are going to drive the future of media. I wanted to ask you, do you see yourself or you guys falling within one of those pillars, and which one?
I think people always. I think everything that we do is about people. It's about making people feel seen. It's about valuing people. It's about celebrating them. And then even on a business perspective, it's about helping two different types of people understand each other. And so everything that we do always centers that.
I know we're coming up on time, so I'm going to ask you just a couple quick questions. Are you down?
Yeah, let's do it.
Just answer whatever comes up for you.
Okay.
Okay, finish the sentence. The future of media belongs to those who
dare to be different.
One myth about Latinas in sports you're determined to shatter
is that they are avid and major passionate sports fans.
Love that. 10 years from now, when people look back at what you built, what do you hope they say about Drafted and its impact?
I hope that someone says that they came across a platform or something related to Drafted and they felt seen and celebrated, and that empowered them to make a decision or to think about themselves or a little bit different.
I love that. When you hear the phrase the media machine, how does it show up in your world and what part do you play in it?
Media is the epicenter of culture, and it is what we do, and it is important to keep that machine running, but it is also equally important to make sure that we are celebrating the stories and the voices of those who, again, dare to be different and are not afraid to challenge the status quo.
Karina, how can our listeners find you? And do you have any upcoming projects or anything you'd like to promote?
They can find us on We Are Drafted Co. on Instagram, and We Are Drafted on TikTok. And if you go on those platforms, there is a subscription to our newsletter where we announce a lot of cool things that we're doing for the World Cup. So just stay tuned.
Very cool. I'm going to sign up. The Media Machine needs to be there. Where's the link? How can I find it quick enough?
Exactly.
Karina, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me and for building this so that everyone's voices can be heard.
Thanks for joining us on The Media Machine. If somebody sent you this, it's because they care about you and your future. The Media Machine is created by me, Johanna Salazar. I'm also the host and executive producer with Julie Kelman-Redding, who is also the co-host and editor. See you next time.